Anyway, while we're all, why don't we just everybody introduce themselves, and then we can start talking and doing Q&A and taking some questions.
I'm Jessica Dwyer, and I am the moderator. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Heather Pam Anderson, and I play the role of Nancy Thompson.
Mr. Krueger to you punks.
My name's Amanda Wiss, and I play Christina Gray. Christina. Full name. I went full name. I've never done that before. I felt more, it's just more mature.
She's grown up.
She's all grown up.
I'm Ronnie Blakely, and I play Marge Thompson, Nancy's mother.
My name is Mamie Craven. I played the nurse and sleeping with the director.
I did not sleep with the director. Although I did work with him twice in two of the best movies that were ever made, so it's my privilege. My name is Joseph Whipp, and I played Sergeant Parker.
I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions, because this is a phenomenal grouping of people, and it's a very special time for all those fans of Wes Craven. And I think the timing of this convention is great for everybody. I'm very happy to be a part of this. I know you all are too. And I just want to say I'm very, very glad we got this opportunity to celebrate him, because I think it's good for everybody, for when we lose somebody like that is a legend, to have friends out there that know what they've lost. So I want to thank everybody for coming to this show, and I want to thank all of you.
Wes completely changed the face of horror twice with the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Actually, three times. If three times, because Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left were so dark and primitive and halfway between art house and grindhouse, and then with the franchise that we were all part of, and then also with the Scream franchise, where he totally deconstructed horror and threw it back at you, the fans, and said that he knew what you knew what we're up to, and still managed to scare you at the same time. And there's also a little coincidence. We're not that far from Cleveland, and that's where Wes is from. And there's a certain kind of Midwestern discipline about Wes that I always respected, and I think it's an unhappy accident, it's kind of appropriate that we are in the Midwest today. And that you fans of his work are the fans that grew up close to where he was from, and you share that.
And we would never see women at our early conventions in New York, ever.
No.
I would have a line of only young men and boys. And then I'd say 10 years ago.
Well, it was those tight jeans you were wearing.
10 years ago. No, but 10 years ago I noticed such a shift in what is 50-50 now, pretty close. And that's new. That's because of this.
Well, I mean, Heather and I have seen the change from Freddy's at conventions to Freddy girls, and a lot of incarnations of the Freddy girls, sexy ones that are just semi-violent with a scratch on their face, some that are schizophrenic, they're half Freddy and half beautiful, some that are just beautiful and they've totally taken the power from Freddy. And now, everywhere we go, there's Nancy's. I'm looking at a Nancy right here. I love them, because ever since I worked with Heather, I have a thing with that gray hair streak. It's my anchor woman fantasy. Anyway, but Amanda and I were just in the United Kingdom, and there were girls in body bags with worms coming out of their mouths. So
Faces of fear, and it just shows like this young girl being so strong and resourceful, like MacGyver-like. And I just think, it was. She was MacGyver. She was Nancy Thompson MacGyver. MacGruber. I think that was really, really important, especially in a scary movie and in a genre that sort of, what's the word? where women are like running around naked and then they're killed and exploited. Thank you. Like it's just nice to see like that there was this like wholesome, strong girl, and the movie is equally engaging and just as scary without that. That I think was an important thing to say. I'm rambling.
I loved the part that Wes wrote for me. He didn't write it for me, but once I took it, I felt that it was mine. And I love Marge's makeup. You know, he had to write skillfully to have Marge the unknown, more or less, whether she was good or bad. You know, whether she was the cause of the problem or the solution to the problem that her daughter Nancy was having. And Marge was strong-willed, and she took action. She took her daughter to the sleep clinic. She took her daughter to, she, you know, boarded up the house with iron to protect her daughter.
The best line of all is Mommy killed him. She actually had killed Freddy Krueger. That was her strength in a way that maybe has come back to bite the, you know, after these kids, but still it was your strength as a woman who decided to kill Freddy Krueger, even Mommy killed him. I think that's like an incredibly strong line.
I
Which was
saw
one
a
of the-
t-shirt with a victory line.
How cool.
Yeah, at another show.
Oh, very cool. Well, a fan came up, I guess it was yesterday. I think it was it Scott or Shane? Anyway, with the Laserdisc, Laserdisc version, which still had more of the speech that Marge gave in the furnace room when she was telling Nancy about her past with Freddy, and that there had been other boys and girls in the other kids' families, and that Nancy had once had a little brother, and that Marge, of course, had taken the kerosene or whatever it was, and that she had burned up Freddy and killed him, which is why he couldn't bother her anymore. So I know that was a very beautifully written scene, and I'm not sure why these
Was it implied that I killed your brother?
Yes.
Oh, I never.
Yeah, and one of the fans, is the fan here today? I wouldn't want to say fan and make that sound anything less than totally
Hansel and
respectable.
Gretel by Wes Craven, and she had a little brother that I killed.
So Wes had that in there, that was all in there. But somehow that, in cutting and editing the film,
Not the movie.
yeah, and as they continue to make versions of it for television and different productions of it, they continue to cut. So that in some ways, the people who do appreciate the movie, it's wonderful that you all, and those of you who do care, can keep it alive, because it does get chopped. It gets changed every time it's put into a new format, for a new size or for a new length of time. And another thing I just wanted to say, aside from the thing about the women and how Wes was able to write for women, which I do believe he was able to do, because, you know, Nancy's character was so well done, and Tina's character was so well done. A couple of things is that Wes was able to communicate with kids. He really knew kids, teenagers, and he could communicate with them and write for them and write realistically for them and make them cutting edge. You know, look, Nancy was a straight kid. She dressed straight, you know, going to and from school in her pink outfits, but she was a tough chick, you know. And the idea when we made the movie was that it's in some ways, you know, when you think of an A movie and a B movie and a C movie, sometimes that's based on budget, largely it is. And when horror movies began to become A movies, such as Robert mentioned, The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, those were A movies starring with A stars and all that, with huge budgets, you know, huge budgets. This was a small budget with unknowns, largely. John Saxon and I had worked, but largely the rest was unknown. So you have to think about Wes's casting ability. his ability to put people together, how magical that was, and to see it. And he didn't act like a kid, and he didn't look tough. It's not like he put on anything to be that. In some ways, he was like Nicholas Ray in that way that Nicholas Ray was able to have James Dean and Sal Mineo and Natalie Wood, work for him, and James Dean and Dennis, in Rebel Without a Cause. It's that same kind of rapport to me that he had, and that we didn't realize then that what we ourselves thought of as a B movie, it was a $1.8 million movie, I believe. 1.3. Would go to number one, which it did go to number one, like literally, it went to number one. And that nowadays, anything like this would have been possible, and that Wes would be at the top echelon and considered a rebel himself and a revolutionary and at the top of the heap and an icon. He's called an icon all the time. He created this world. He really did. It wasn't like that. And when Bob Shea, the producer, and I were writing each other last week, when Wes died, I wrote to Bob and I said, remember what it was like? Remember what we did? Remember how it was? And he wrote me back, yeah, remember what it was like? Remember how we were? Remember what we did? Remember. Because they had nothing. They were on a shoelace. The line producer was pregnant. And after all that, Sarah Risher, and running around doing full-time work, over full-time, pregnant, 9 months pregnant. And then Bob Shea, the producer, he then went on to join Time Warner and become a board member of Time Warner. I mean, he took it all the way to the top. Huh?
The house that Nightmare built.
Yes,
New
yes.
Line Cinema.
Yeah, New Line. And, $1 billion, and it's still going. And so now Nightmare is a classic, which really probably, as Robert was saying, may be considered, I don't know if I'm overdoing this, but perhaps with Frankenstein and Dracula, perhaps with the classics. And this was a little movie, and anyway, I've gone off on a tangent. But I do think that part of the reason that it had this staying power and legs, as they say in the industry, and running on and year after year, is 100% because of Wes, 100% because of Wes, and his casting ability, and then we were lucky to all be together in it. And yes, I do think he wrote fantastic roles for women.
Can I just say, it's okay, can you all hear me? Yeah. If I had to say what Wes Craven was afraid of, his biggest fear was that when he passed, that he would be remembered as a schlock, and that's his word that he used, a schlocky horror film director. Now, this was before Nightmare, okay? This was before Nightmare came and did what it did. It wasn't his first go-round. I mean, he had done a number of films, and they're all incredible, and they were all groundbreaking. So I just want to say that I am, and I know y'all understand this because you knew him so well, that I'm so pleased by the press and the accolades, and it goes on and on and on. You get quotes from everybody, from, there was I heard something, one of the royal family in England was talking about him. He would fucking love that. He would have,
On a slightly different tone. to show the power of feminine words, Nancy does call me an asshole.
Now, just to echo Mimi for a second, and maybe, I think Heather and I have talked about this, maybe you and I as well, Amanda, but we weren't allowed to say the word slasher. It was verboten on the set of Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, if I come at you with that claw glove and I swing it at you, there's no other verb to use except I slashed at you. But that word, that term had been so abused, and it was repugnant to Wes. And we would never use that word on the set. We never called ourselves a slasher film. And Wes never wanted it to be that. It's far more imaginative than the nihilistic villain who's just chasing you in a cornfield with a machete. And the other one was, and I remember, gosh, I think it was a Hollywood lunch with Wes, and he had this great article in one of the trades. I mean, it was a great article. Wes had just signed. It might have been around Scream or something. He just signed for a huge deal, and and he was pleased as punch. But every time they talked about it in the trades, they would always start the caption, "Horrormeister Wes Craven," and Wes was like, he goes, how did I become a Horrormeister? He's like, he hated it. He hated to be called that, And I know even in some of the eulogies they've said that, because I think some journalists think it's a classy term, and it probably means horror master, if properly translated. But he just hated it because it was such a variety, such a trade paper word,
Speaking of the trade paper, so when we did 3 movies together, and by the 7th one, we actually had some pretty good press, and we'd gone to the Toronto Film Festival and won for best film there. And then I said, well, maybe it's our chance, Wes, we'll finally be on the back page of the Hollywood Reporter. They have like pictures of directors and actresses at big parties or like around town. And we would just joke with each other that we still hadn't made it to the back page of Variety. And you know what, I don't get the Hollywood Reporter, I don't read it as much anymore, but I'm just not sure if Wes was ever on that back page. I just think they had a ban on Horrormeisters or something, I don't know. But that was our joke.
Just to add to this, we were mentioning Wes's eye. I mean, yeah, he was a writer and a director, but look who he discovered. Now, it's easy to say Johnny Depp, but we, but aside from anybody sitting up here, who's had a wonderful career as a result of Wes, Courtney Cox had only done 1/2 of a season of Friends when he starred her. Drew Barrymore was still known as a child star, and she was doing low-budget TV movies called Poison Ivy when he made a woman out of her on screen. Bill Pullman, we mentioned Bill Pullman earlier, Angela Bassett. He used Angela Bassett before there was a Tina Turner biodrama. And you look at Patricia Arquette, she's got an Oscar now. These are the people that Wes was responsible for over the years. And there's others I'm forgetting now. Larry Fishburne, he had a great eye. Wes had a great eye for talent. And you can see it throughout his movies. There's people, that had their first experience with Wes that have gone on to a lot of great things in that town, both in front of the camera and behind the camera.